At 20, you feel like time is endless, like you're standing at the beginning of a vast horizon. At 30, you start chasing time, measuring, optimizing, trying on a race you don't fully understand. But at 40, something shifts. You no longer chase time. You begin to listen to it. Carl Jung once said, "Life really begins at 40." And he didn't mean it as a consolation. He meant it as a revelation. Up until 40, we are collecting data, trying on roles, building identities, but none of them are truly ours. It's like rehearsing for a play without ever asking who wrote the script. We strive to succeed, to please, to be seen, yet so often we have no idea who we are behind performance. Our choices are driven more by survival than authenticity. We become what others expect, not out of deception, but out of habit. Jung called this the first half of life, a necessary phase of ego building, social adaptation, and persona development. But the persona, as he warned, is not the self. It is only the mask. And masks, no matter how polished, eventually crack. At 40, the cracks begin to show, not always through disaster, but often through a quiet restlessness. You wake up one day and wonder, is this it? The job feels hollow. The relationship strained. The mirror unfamiliar. These are not failures. These are invitations. Invitations from the unconscious. Whispers from the self. The deeper part of you that has been waiting patiently to be heard. Jung understood this moment as sacred. The soul's knock on the door. It doesn't ask gently. It disrupts. It destabilizes. It demands truth. Many resist this call. They double down on the mask, chase new pleasures, distract, deny, but the soul will not be silenced. And what we ignore becomes suffering, emotional exhaustion, midlife crises, lost purpose. These are not anomalies. They are messages, messages written in the ink of unlived dreams. The true crisis is not aging. It's realizing you've lived half your life for everything but your soul. Jung believed this was the real beginning, the turning point from persona to self. He called it individuation, the sacred process of becoming whole. Not perfect, not polished. Whole. It means integrating what you've repressed, embracing the parts you feared. It means making peace with the past and becoming a conscious participant in your future. You realize that all your striving was useful, but incomplete. Success means little if it isn't aligned with your inner life. Recognition is hollow when it's aimed at the version of you that isn't real. The soul doesn't want applause. It wants presence. And presence requires silence, an inner stillness most people avoid. Around 40, life begins to demand depth. The friendships that once entertained you no longer nourish you. The ambitions that drove you now feel like distractions. Even your sense of identity begins to tremble. Who am I without the job title? Without the role? Without the image? These questions don't emerge by accident. They're the signs of ripening. You are not falling apart. You are shedding what no longer fits. The house you built, strong, impressive, starts to feel too small. You begin to crave truth, substance, a return to something ancient inside you. This is the soul reclaiming its voice. And it doesn't speak in trends. It speaks in symbols. Nightmares, synchronicities, sudden longings. They are not random. They are reminders. Reminders that you are more than the sum of your obligations. You are not here to perform. You are here to remember. And remembering takes courage. Because everything the world taught you to chase may have been a distraction. But the moment you stop running, the moment you sit with yourself in silence, life truly begins. Turning 40 doesn't mark the beginning of the end. It marks the end of pretending. The life you built with so much effort begins to reveal its hollowness, not because it failed, but because it was never fully yours. And now, the question arises, softly at first, then louder with each passing day. What do I really want? Not what others expected, not what made sense on paper, but what your soul has been aching to live. This question can be terrifying because it has no quick answer. It's not about switching careers or moving cities, though those may come. It's about shifting the foundation beneath it all. You begin to see that much of what you called normal was actually numbing. You notice how often you said yes out of fear, how often you performed happiness while carrying quiet grief, how often you betrayed yourself just to be accepted. And now, acceptance from others no longer feels like a reward. It feels like a cage. You don't want to fit in. You want to feel whole. Jung believed the midlife point was when the self finally begins to emerge from behind the ego. The ego wanted success. The self wants meaning. The ego wanted applause. The self wants integrity. The ego was loud. The self is steady and patient. It waited through decades of noise. Now it steps forward, not to destroy, but to realign. And in that realignment, some things will fall away. People, plans, patterns. They may not survive the shift, and that's okay, because what remains after the shedding is true. You no longer chase love that costs you your dignity. You no longer apologize for your depth. You no longer explain your silence to those who never listen anyway. Something ancient in you begins to stir, the archetypal self. Jung might say, the one who remembers why you came here, not to impress, not to accumulate, but to awaken. An awakening is not glamorous. It is messy, disruptive, and honest. It brings up everything you've hidden under routines and responsibilities, the childhood wounds, the unprocessed grief, the longing for freedom you buried to feel safe. You begin to understand that healing doesn't mean going back to who you were. It means allowing yourself to become who you've always been. That takes time and tenderness. The version of you emerging now is softer, but stronger. Boundaries become natural, not as walls, but as sacred definitions. You begin to choose peace over performance, stillness over stimulation, authenticity over approval. You stop rushing to explain yourself because you finally feel safe within yourself. There's a kind of quiet that grows around those who know themselves, a gravity, a calm confidence that doesn't need to shout to be heard. And people feel it. Some are drawn to it. Others are threatened by it, not because you become cold, but because you become clear. You no longer beg for connection. You invite it. You no longer chase meaning. You embody it. This is what it means to grow whole, to live not from reaction, but from essence. And as your essence returns, so does your intuition. You begin to trust the quiet voice within, the one that was always right. Even when you didn't listen, it tells you what to keep, what to release, who to become. And finally, you feel a home, not in a place, not in a relationship, but in your own skin. This is where the real journey begins, not on the outside, but within. At this stage of life, clarity becomes your most valuable currency, not the kind of clarity that comes from logic, but the kind that rises from the gut, intuitive, embodied, undeniable. You stop needing reasons to protect your peace. Peace becomes reason enough. You start to feel the difference between what drains you and what restores you, and you act accordingly. There's less tolerance for half-truths, for smiles, or surface-level conversations. You don't crave noise anymore. You crave meaning, even if it comes in silence. The friends you choose now are fewer, but they are mirrors of your inner world. You no longer build connections through performance, but through presence. You value conversations where nothing needs to be explained because everything is understood. Jung described this as a movement from persona to essence, from the mask to the soul. You wore the mask long enough. It kept you safe. It helped you belong. But it was never you. Now you take it off, not with anger, but with reverence. You bless the version of yourself who wore it to survive. And you welcome a version rising now, raw, luminous, whole. This transformation is sacred. It doesn't happen all at once, and it doesn't always make sense. One day, you just stop needing to be impressive and start needing to be real. One morning, you wake up and realize you're no longer willing to betray your soul for convenience. The world might call this midlife crisis. Jung would call it midlife initiation, a rite of passage into authenticity. It's not that you're losing yourself. It's that you're shedding everything you never were. The layers fall off, roles, identities, ambitions that no longer resonate. You don't have to announce this change. You just live it. And in your quiet transformation, the world responds, sometimes with confusion, sometimes with awe. You start to notice beauty in overlooked places, A breeze, a pause, a glance of gratitude. What used to feel urgent now feels irrelevant. You're not apathetic. You're aligned. You don't need to prove yourself because you finally met yourself. There's a depth to this encounter, like remembering something ancient and eternal that had been waiting within you all along. You realize the search was never for something out there. It was for the permission to be who you are. And now that you have it, not from the world, but from yourself, you are free. Free to rest. Free to say no. Free to change your mind, your path, your definition of success. Free to stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. Free to move slowly in a world addicted to speed. Free to feel deeply in a world that numbs. Free to speak your truth, even when your voice trembles. Free to be seen, not for the mask, but for the miracle beneath it. Carl Jung believed that true growth always involves confrontation with your shadow, your wounds, your illusions. This is not self-help. This is self-return. The path is not about fixing what's broken. It's about reclaiming what was buried. Your softness, your clarity, your joy, the child you abandoned, the artist you silenced, the wildness you exiled. All of it still lives in you, waiting for your courage to come back home. And when you do, you don't just find healing. You find wholeness. Not perfection, but integration. Not a perfect life, but a meaningful one. This is a quiet revolution of midlife, when your story stops being about survival and becomes about soul. And as you walk this path, you begin to feel something you haven't felt in a long time. Peace, not because everything is solved, but because you've stopped running. You finally turn toward yourself, and what you find is more than enough. You begin to see more clearly that much of what you pursued in the first half of life was shaped not by your soul, but by your conditioning. Now, the question is no longer what should I do, but who am I when I stop doing? The rhythm slows, not because you are less capable, but because you are more aware, more deliberate, more attuned to what truly matters. You no longer wish to prove, you wish to experience. The applause that once seemed essential begins to fade into background noise. Now you want something different. Peace, presence, purpose. And yet, this shift is rarely celebrated. A society addicted to youth and speed sees your depth as retreat. But it isn't. It's arrival. Carl Jung believed that the second half of life has its own logic, its own calling, its own sacred unfolding. You are not here to replicate your past successes. You are here to integrate all that you become. The masks fall away. The performance ends. You no longer need to impress. You need to connect. But this too requires courage, because many will not understand your transformation. They will call your boundaries arrogance. They will label your solitude as sadness. They will misinterpret your silence as weakness. But those who truly see you will recognize the fire beneath your calm, because now you burn slower, but stronger. Jung said that individuation was not about becoming perfect, but about becoming whole. Wholeness is messy. It means owning your contradictions. It means knowing that you can be both strong and tender, ambitious and tired, wise and still learning. It means knowing you are enough, even when you don't feel like it. At this stage, your values begin to shift. You start to value quiet mornings more than loud parties. You value conversations that go deep, not wide. You value honesty over charm, presence over popularity, depth over decoration. You stop chasing what sparkles and start searching for what sustains. You begin to live from the inside out, and it shows. You speak less, but your words carry weight. You love differently, not desperately, but devotedly. You listen with more than your ears. You see people for who they are, not who you want them to be. You grieve the illusions you once needed to survive. And you welcome the truth, even when it hurts. This is where life stops being a performance and becomes a prayer. You begin to trust your inner seasons. You know that some relationships will fall away, that some ambitions will fade, that some dreams must die so new ones can be born. You stop trying to be everything to everyone, and you start becoming something real to yourself. This is not selfishness. This is sacred responsibility. You've spent decades tending to the outside world. Now, it's time to tend the garden within, not for the approval of others, but because your soul needs sunlight. 2. Your journey inward is not a retreat. It is a revolution, and it will change everything. Carl Jung said that when we deny our inner truth, it returns to us as fate, but when we embrace it, it returns as freedom. So if you feel the old ways no longer fit, let them fall. You are not breaking down. You are breaking open. And what comes next is not the end. It is the emergence of a life that finally feels like yours. There comes a time in the journey when you stop asking the world for directions and start following the compass within. That moment is sacred. After 40, something subtle but profound begins to stir. It's not a loud transformation. It's a quiet, grounded shift in presence. You begin to realize that life is no longer about chasing. It's about choosing what aligns, choosing what nourishes, choosing what feels like home. The mask you wore to be accepted no longer fits your face. The smile you used to hide the ache grows weary. And so you begin to remove the layers. Gently, painfully, honestly. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And that privilege arrives disguised as discontent, as questioning, as loss. It's the moment you stop pretending that the noise outside can fill the silence inside. For the first time, you start making decisions not from ambition, but from alignment. You stop pursuing relationships to feel whole, and instead start cultivating wholeness to deepen your relationships. The ego, once obsessed with being seen, begins to seek stillness instead of spotlights. At this stage, what matters is no longer how many admire you, but how deeply you admire your own truth. You learn to say no, not out of bitterness, but out of reverence for your time. You learn to walk away, not because you're angry, but because you're ready to honor your peace. Life no longer feels like a stage. It feels like a sacred path, a path where every step echoes with purpose. Every detour holds wisdom. You begin to trust the seasons of your soul. Spring returns not through force, but through surrender. You realize you no longer have to earn rest. You simply allow it. The world may still rush, but you learn the art of slowing down. You sip your coffee with presence. You listen to stories with curiosity. You hold silence without fear. The person you used to be starts to feel like a memory, someone you once wore like an outfit. But now, you dress yourself in presence, not pretense. The conversations you once avoided now feel necessary. The questions you once feared now feel sacred. You begin to understand that everything real begins within. Carl Jung taught that wholeness is not achieved by cutting off parts of yourself, but by embracing them all. And so, you begin the holy work of integration. You sit with your shame and ask what it came to teach you. You embrace your anger and see where it points to unloved wounds. You cry not out of weakness, but as a form of inner cleansing. You laugh not to perform, but because joy now feels like truth. You learn that forgiveness is not forgetting. It's releasing the hope for a better past. You stop running from solitude and start creating sanctuary. Alone no longer means lonely. It means full of self. The pain you avoided becomes a passageway to purpose. The regrets you buried begin to blossom into redirections. The relationships you let go of, they were chapters, not failures. You stop trying to explain your transformation to those committed to misunderstanding you. You stop dimming your light for rooms that fear the fire of your truth. Life stops being a race and starts feeling like a sacred ritual. The old you chase validation. The new you values vibration. You don't need a crowd to feel complete. You only need congruence. Carl Jung reminded us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. But now you see, now you choose, now you create. And this is the beginning of a life not shaped by survival, but sculpted by soul. After everything, the questions, the unraveling, the quiet revolutions within, you arrive at something rare, clarity. Not the clarity of having all the answers, but the clarity of knowing what no longer belongs. The clarity of recognizing what drains you, what lifts you, what is simply noise. This is where a deeper maturity settles in, not in age, but in awareness. You start to see life not as a list of achievements, but as a canvas of meaning. You're no longer seduced by chaos. You crave coherence. The approval you once chased now seems irrelevant compared to the inner knot of alignment. You realize how sacred your attention is and how rare your peace has become, so you guard both like treasures. Carl Jung said, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." And now you are finally awake. Awake to the patterns that ruled you. Awake to the roles you no longer have to play. Awake to the stillness beneath the noise. You begin to choose discomfort over dishonesty. You choose depth over distraction. You choose presence over performance. You no longer abandon yourself to belong, because now you understand. Belonging begins within. You stop bargaining for love. You start embodying it. You stop waiting to be chosen. You realize you have always been the one. At this stage, self-respect becomes non-negotiable. Peace becomes your baseline, not a bonus. And any relationship, opportunity, or routine that disrupts that peace is gently released. Because the soul knows what costs your peace is too expensive. You revisit your past not to reopen wounds, but to reclaim power. The child you once were, you hold them now with tenderness. The mistakes you once made, you harvest their wisdom. The people who left, you let them go with grace. This is not bitterness. It is sovereignty. The desire to fix others fades. Now, you're devoted to healing yourself. You're no longer obsessed with being understood. You're in love with understanding yourself. You redefine success, not by how full your calendar is, but by how full your soul feels. You start to love slower, speak softer, listen deeper. You're not here to prove anymore. You're here to be. The old urgency to be everything dissolves. You begin to trust that being truly yourself is more than enough. Jung taught that individuation is not becoming someone else. It is becoming who you were always meant to be. So now you live in alignment, not an obligation. You speak your truth, not to convince, but because silence will betray your essence. You choose rituals over routines, connection over convenience. You show up not to impress, but to express. Your presence becomes your power. You no longer fear being alone. You honor solitude as sacred space. You walk slower, breathe deeper, laugh easier. You no longer rush to fix the broken. You sit beside it until it reveals its lesson. You don't seek the light outside. You ignite the fire within. This is not the end. This is a return to wholeness, to soul, to the life that was always waiting for you to arrive.